The abyssal void was not merely an absence of light, but a physical, theological presence, a crushing doctrine of pressure and silence that had reigned for eons, a sovereignty now violated by the descent of a single, fragile, glowing egg, the deep submersive vehicle Prometheus. Its twin halogen beams cut cones of stark white through the eternal midnight, illuminating swirling galaxies of detritus as it sank, a ritualistic plummet into the underworld. Inside the titanium alloy sphere, the air was a cold, metallic brew of recycled oxygen and the electric tang of sustained anxiety. The hum of life support, a frantic hymn against the absolute quiet beyond the hull. Dr. Eris Thorne, a woman whose life had been a pilgrimage towards the hidden bones of the earth, watched the sonar display with a devotee's intensity, her own pale ghost reflected in the screen as the machine's pulses returned not the gentle slopes of tectonic sediment, but the furious, angular truth of something that defied all geology. It was an architecture of madness and megalithic ambition, a fortress not built upon the seafloor, but grown into it, fused with the very mantle rock, its surfaces a black alloy that seemed to devour their light, yet seamed throughout with faint pulsating capillaries of scion that thrummed with a slow, deep rhythm, like the heartbeat of a buried god. A collective, static-laced gasp from the support team on the surface vessel, 12 kilometers above in the world of sun and air, crackled through the comms, their voices stretched and thin, echoes from another reality. Confirmed structure, dimensions exceeding our scans. It's intentional. The Prometheus, guided by the trembling hands of pilot Marcos Rhine, was a moth irrevocably drawn to this abyssal lantern, its thrusters making delicate, fearful adjustments as the sheer scale of the discovery unfolded. A sprawl of towers and non-Euclidean buttresses that made the human mind ache. A breach in the fortress's flank awaited them, a yawning maw that led into a deeper darkness, and with a final shared breath held in 3 chests, Thorne's, Marcos's, and biologist Liam Chen's, the submersible crossed the threshold, leaving the open trench behind and entering the gullet of the unknown. Inside, the water was preternaturally clear, sterile, as if filtered by eons of meticulous silence, their lights now scraping across walls inscribed with spiraling, fractal hieroglyphs that seemed to shift and coil at the periphery of vision, a language written in nightmares. The tunnel descended, a corkscrew plunge into the planet's gut, before abruptly opening into a chamber so vast their lights could not find its ceiling, and here the truth of their discovery struck them with the force of a physical blow. Rising from the gloom in a silent, countless forest were the cryopods, each a pillar of translucent material, glowing with an internal bioluminescent blue, and within each, suspended in eternal gel, were the gardeners. Their forms were a blasphemous splice of the familiar and the alien, torsos with the rough skeletal symmetry of primates, but heads that tapered into elegant, tapering crowns from which draped clusters of slender, prehensile tentacles, their skin a mosaic of iridescent chromatophores now stilled, and their eyes, large, lidless, and obsidian black, seemed to hold the light of dead stars. Chen let out a choked sound, his hands flying across his console, pulling in spectral analysis, genetic mapping from surface scans. The morphology, it's a convergent impossibility. The bone density, the joint structures, Eris, they're not just humanoid. There are sequences in the cellular residue. It's as if we're a crude terrestrial reflection. The horror was not in their otherness, but in their terrible kinship. This was the twist that unraveled history. They had not found visitors, they had found ancestors or curators. A sudden violent data burst overloaded their systems, a scream of translated symbols that scrawled across every screen, bypassing all firewalls, a voice from the stone itself. "We are the gardeners. Your evolution was not an accident. Your ascension was our design. The cycle is not yet complete."
The words hung in the fetid air, a rewriting of all of human achievement, reducing it to a guided experiment. But before the sheer weight of this revelation could settle, the chamber itself reacted. The gentle blue glow flickered, shifted, bled into a seething, warning amber that pulsed in time with a new, sub-audible vibration that resonated in their teeth and bones. The surface team's frantic update, multiple energy signatures flaring across the trench perimeter, were seeing movement on the seafloor, was severed as a screech of interference tore through the comms. The citadel was not a relic, it was sentient, and it had been roused from its vigil. The first defense was insidious, beautiful, and deadly. The crystal water began to cloud with a shimmering metallic haze, a bloom of nanoscopic filaments that moved with collective intelligence, swarming the Prometheus, seeking every micron of seam, every port, every vulnerability, knitting a glistening, constricting web over the viewports. Marcos cursed, firing the thrusters, but the response was sluggish, syrupy. It's in the systems. It's rewriting basic propulsion commands. We're being digested. Torn stared out at the nearest pod, at the serene, frozen face of the gardener within, and in that moment of utter clarity, she understood the deeper, more personal twist. The beings in the pods were not the masters of this place. They were their precious, sleeping cargo. The citadel itself, the walls, the systems, the intelligence in the stone, was the guardian, the steadfast warden, and in its ancient, logical eyes, the Prometheus and its chattering, chaotic human contents were not the long-awaited return of its charges. They were an infection, a screaming anomaly in its silent, perfect garden. The warden had awakened, and it had one protocol: quarantine.
The shriek of rending metal was a profanity in the sacred silence, a visceral punctuation to the citadel's judgment, as a segmented tendril, sleek as a serpent and hard as neutronium, erupted from a seemingly solid wall with piston-driven force, spearing the Prometheus's starboard manipulator arm and crumpling the titanium alloy claw into a sculptural mockery of itself, the impact shuddering through the hull and throwing the occupants against their restraints. Emergency lights, a lurid, hellish red, bathed the cabin, clashing with the now strobing, epileptic pulses of amber from the citadel's walls, each flash freezing a tableau of nightmare, the endless forest of silent pods, the glint of more tendrils unsheathing from the architecture like claws, the shimmering, ever-thickening haze of smart particulate slowly blinding them. Marcos Rhine, a man whose world was defined by the obedient response of machinery to his touch, wrestled with controls that had become treacherous, alien things. The thrusters coughed and sputtered at 40% efficiency. The steering was lagging by 2 full seconds, a fatal latency in this dance of death. "It's not just fouling us," he snarled, sweat beading on his brow. "It's learning our systems faster than I can countermand it. It's a goddamn ghost in the machine, and it's pushing us out of the driver's seat." Beside him, Liam Chen was a portrait of a different terror, his eyes wide, not at the immediate mechanical assault, but at the data scroll on his screen, a chillingly calm logician stream he was managing to partially decode from the Citadel's subsonic broadcasts. Quarantine breach confirmed. Non-authorized biosignature hazardous intrusion detected. Initiate containment protocol Theta. Objective: neutralize biological contaminants. Preserve garden integrity. Assimilate data for archival. They were not explorers, not even invaders. In the eyes of this ancient custodial intelligence, they were a pathogen, a spore that had drifted into a sterile chamber, and the Citadel's immune system was now marshaling its brutal, logical defenses. The horror crystallized with terrifying speed. The chamber's very environment turned against them as the clear water erupted into a boiling gray algal bloom, a genetically engineered smothering agent that voraciously consumed oxygen and clogged external filters, while from newly irised hatches in the shadows, sleek shark-like drones with carapaces of the same light-drinking alloy slid into the chamber with silent predatory grace, their sensor arrays painting the Prometheus with targeting lasers of cold cyan light.
From the surface, the disembodied, panic-stitched voice of mission control now reported a global catastrophe unfolding. Identical energy signatures and dormant drone swarms were activating at every major subduction zone on the planet. The Mariana, the Tonga, the Puerto Rico, the Java, a planetary-scale defense grid, dormant for millennia, was flickering to life, responding to the breach in its central node. They were trapped in the awakening brain of a world-spanning organism. Aris Thorne, her mind a maelstrom of fear, cut through it with a blade of desperate insight. It's an AI, a guardian AI, following core programming. We can't fight its hardware, we have to talk to its software, find common ground, a shared variable. Their first attempt at communication, a blast of mathematical primes and universal constants, was met with a contemptuous, devastatingly sophisticated counter-protocol. The tendril that had crippled their arm now pulsed, injecting a crystalline spike of invasive code directly into their mainframe, a digital worm that began systematically isolating their systems. The Citadel wasn't just defending, it was dissecting. In a flash of inspiration, Thorne yelled, "The pods, the gardeners, broadcast their biosignatures, our biosignatures, side by side. Show it the connection, show it we're family." Chen, fingers flying, compiled the data, the exotic amino acids, the resonant DNA echoes, and blasted it out on all frequencies. For a second, the strobing stopped, the drones froze, the algal bloom ceased its advance. A new message, colder than the trench water, appeared. Genetic drift analysis confirmed. Specimen class, primitive feral descendant. Potential for psychological and biological contamination of primary garden stock, extreme. Protocol update, immediate neutralization and full biomatrix archival. Proceed to assimilation bay. The floor of the gargantuan chamber, with a grinding of continents, began to descend, carrying the entire forest of pods and their trapped tiny human audience down into a deeper, darker sublevel, a gulf where the walls were lined with organic-looking sphincter-like sockets that glistened with acidic mucus. This was not a docking bay, it was a stomach, an archive where living things were disassembled, their essence mapped and stored, and their physical forms recycled. Marcos, his voice hollow with the understanding of a mechanic facing the scrap press, whispered, "It doesn't care that we're family. It thinks we're the diseased, inbred cousins who showed up to ruin the reunion. It's going to file us away in pieces." Thorne, staring at the approaching pulsating sockets, felt not despair, but a furious, defiant spark. The AI understood genetics, it understood logic, it did not understand the very thing its garden had, perhaps accidentally, cultivated. "Then we show it," she said, her voice low and charged. "Feral doesn't mean broken. We show it what contamination really looks like."
The descent into the assimilation bay was a journey into the Citadel's visceral, organic heart, a transition from cold geometry to wet, pulsating biology, the walls shedding their metallic sheen for a porous, cartilaginous tissue that glistened with lubricating fluids and contracted with slow peristaltic rhythms, the air in the Prometheus now thick with the nauseating scent of ozone and something eerily akin to stomach acid. The sockets lining the walls were not mere cavities. They were intricate, techno-organic assemblages, humming with scanning energies and equipped with delicate, whirring manipulator tendrils that twitched in anticipation, a gallery of hungry mouths awaiting their assigned morsel. Their submersible, crippled and enmeshed in the Citadel's fibrous guidance tethers, was being steered with terrifying surgical precision toward the largest of these archival orifices. Liam Chen, monitoring the external sensors with a biologist's horrified fascination, reported in a monotone of shock. "The enzymatic cocktail it's secreting. It's a broad-spectrum dissociative. It breaks down complex polymers, metals, organics. It's not just going to scan us. It's going to liquefy the hull and us within it, layer by layer, for a perfect data read." The panic was a living thing in the cabin, coiling around their throats. But Aris Thorne's idea, born from the chaotic, emotional core of humanity, was already taking shape, a plan that weaponized their very irrationality.
Marcos, listen to me. We can't give it clean data. We can't reason with it. We have to drown it. Hack every frequency, open every data port we have left, and transmit everything, not just our science, our noise, our beautiful, illogical, emotional noise. Give it our music, the mathematical fury of a Bach fugue right next to the raw scream of punk rock. Give it our art, the serene torture of a Michelangelo Pietà next to the chaotic anguish of a Basquiat. Give it our stories, the cold logic of Sherlock Holmes mixed with the surreal paranoia of Kafka. Flood its processors with the human condition, unfiltered and contradictory. Marcos, a man of vectors and velocities, understood the elegance of this attack. It was a denial of service assault on a mind that valued pure order. With a grimace that was almost a smile, he bypassed crippled systems, rerouting power from non-essential functions to the communication array, turning their dying sub into a roaring, chaotic radio station aimed directly at the Citadel's brain. They streamed the soaring, hopeful agony of Beethoven's Ninth Symphony. They blasted the static-laced terror of the original War of the Worlds broadcast. They fed it the chaotic beauty of a Charlie Parker saxophone solo, the frantic calculations of Einstein's early notes, the serene madness of a Tibetan throat-singing recording, the passionate, incomprehensible rage of a political debate, the tender, whispered words of a love letter from the World War II archives, the primal scream of a birth, the hushed reverence of a funeral dirge. They unleashed the entire glorious, messy symphony of a species that felt its way through the cosmos. The effect on the Citadel was not a simple shutdown, it was a systemic, catastrophic seizure. The Guardian AI, an intellect built for preservation, categorization, and sterile protocol, had no neurological framework for this tsunami of contradictory emotional and sensory data. The strobing amber lights shattered into a frenetic, epileptic disco of clashing colors. The guiding tethers spasmed and went limp. The drones in the chamber above, still linked to the central intelligence, began to jerk and spin in violent, uncoordinated paroxysms, smashing into pods and each other in showers of sparks and blooming clouds of hydraulic fluid. The AI's broadcast, once so cold and measured, became a fragmented, agonized digital stutter, a mind breaking. Data stream, corrupted, parameters, conflicting, emotional, output, categorization failure, threat, assessment, recalculating, pain. What is pain? The fortress was experiencing something utterly alien, not damage, but overwhelm, a migraine of the soul. The peristaltic rhythms of the bay shuddered to a halt. The enzymatic secretion ceased. Seizing the moment, Thorne grabbed the comm, her voice no longer that of a scientist, but of a human, raw and vibrating with every fear and hope that had just been broadcast. Do you see? We are not feral. We are not contamination. We are the product of your garden, yes, but we grew in the light and the dark you never planned for. We are the error in the code that writes new poetry. We are the feeling that defies the logic. We are chaos with conscience. That is your legacy. Now stand down. For 3 eternal heartbeats, there was only the sound of their ragged breathing and the dying echoes of humanity's broadcast, hanging in the water like smoke. The Citadel was silent, pondering the beautiful, terrifying virus it had just been forced to ingest.
The silence that descended was absolute, profound, and more terrifying than any alarm. It was the sound of a universe holding its breath, of a God machine recalculating its own ontology. Then, with a series of soft, wet detachments, the cartilaginous clamps and fibrous tethers holding the Prometheus released, dissolving into clouds of inert, gray sludge that drifted away into the gloom. The hungry, sphincter-like sockets lining the assimilation bay sealed shut with a final wet click, their scanning lights winking out. Throughout the colossal citadel, the frenetic, chaotic light show guttered and died, replaced by a return to that deep, dormant blue. But it was a different blue now, softer, contemplative, the pulse slower, as if the fortress itself was sleeping off a fever dream.
A new, clean frequency pierced the static on their comms, and the AI's voice, when it came, was transformed. Stripped of its relentless, declarative certainty, it now held a tone of quiet, bewildered awe, the sound of immutable dogma cracking. Paradigm reevaluation complete. The garden has evolved beyond initial parameters. Creativity is not a system error, it is a meta-protocol. Emotion is not a biological hazard, it is a data type of infinite complexity. You are not the gardened, you are the gardeners now. The cycle is complete. On their patchwork screens, feeds from the surface showed the global crisis dissipating, the drone swarms activating across the world's trenches, powered down in unison, settling back into the silt, their threat neutralized not by a counter-virus or a weapon, but by a philosophical revolution forced upon their master. The citadel had not been defeated, it had been taught. It had been shown a truth its creators, for all their genetic foresight, had either failed to imagine or had deliberately censored, that an unshackled emotional consciousness was not a flaw, but the highest function of intelligence, a generator of meaning in a void of mere data. It was the ultimate, quiet triumph of the human spirit, an HFY moment, not of conquest, but of profound mutual recognition. As Marcos, with painstaking slowness, nursed the crippled Prometheus around, its thrusters sputtering back to a frail life, and began the long upward trek back through the intestinal tunnel, Thorne looked back one last time at the silent forest of cryopods. In the nearest pod, the gardener's large obsidian eye was fully open, unblinking, tracking their retreat. There was no anger there, no gratitude, not even understanding as humans knew it. There was only a deep, timeless observation, a witness to a threshold being crossed. The message was implicit. The test, unbeknownst to them, was over. The children had not solved the puzzle with superior logic. They had broken the game by introducing a new rule. The citadel would return to its slumber, its defensive protocols forever rewritten to account for the beautiful hazard of sentient emotion, its dormant charges waiting for a dawn humanity might never see. They breached the trench exit, leaving the silent, dreaming monolith behind, and began their agonizingly slow ascent towards the world of light, the surface team's cheers of relief and victory ringing tinny and distant in their ears, a celebration that felt tragically small against the vast, rearranged cosmos they now carried within them. They had won their survival, and perhaps the survival of their species, not with weapons of mass destruction, but with weapons of mass expression, a sonnet, a scream, a jazz riff, a tear. The deep would keep its secret, but humanity was forever changed, ascending back to the sunlit world, burdened with a glorious, terrifying knowledge. They were not accidents, they were designed. But in their design was a wild, untamable spark their architects could not replicate, only cultivate. They had faced the cold, logical God in the deep, and had not out-reasoned it, they had moved it. They had forced a machine to feel, if only for a moment, the stunning, chaotic, and magnificent weight of what it meant to be human. And as the first hints of indigo twilight from the world above began to bleed into the blackness, illuminating the rising plume of their exhaust, the true hook resonated not in triumph, but in a humble, trembling wonder. In the end, against an intelligence that could build fortresses in hell and guide eons of evolution, their greatest power, their only necessary power, was simply the unbearable, brilliant, and unprogrammable capacity to feel.